Welcome,
Okay.
Adriana.
Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're super excited because this project was very ambitious. And when we had applied for it, I thought 20 was easy peasy. But I'm glad we had a great team. I'll be introducing the team and talking a little bit about our experiences. It was a wonderful experience. We've started publishing most of them. But yeah, thank you for being a part of today's session. So our project team, while I was the project manager, I'm truly indebted to Susan Lefebvre. Without her, I couldn't have done this. We couldn't have done this. Susan, and then we have our podcast editor, Violet. We have our resource development person, Gail McCullough. Do you want all three want to say something and then we can move ahead? Susan, we can start with you.
Okay. Yeah, I have to say it was a very interesting experience, and it was a lot of work, but oh my goodness, I learned so much, especially from our podcast editor. I have to give Violet a lot of credit. And what made it so wonderful, which I wasn't expecting, is that it allowed me to reflect on my practice of the last 40 years. And it was a very rewarding experience at the end, even though it was a lot of work. It was very rewarding. So thanks, Ambreen.
Great to have you. Violet.
Hi, everyone. I just got to say, I'm so proud of this podcast. This is one of the most ambitious projects I've worked on. Our team are amazing. We kind of invented a workflow from the ground up. And once we got into like 4 episodes, we hit the ground running and we made I think we've made a really great podcast that is going to it's going to withstand the sands of time and be of lasting value to literacy practitioners. I'm so proud of this. So proud of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Violet.
Thanks.
Gail. You're on mute, Gail.
Hi, everyone. So as Ambreen said, I'm working on the resource development. And so I am going through and transcribing the various podcasts now. And, I've been in this industry for 35 years, but I'm amazed at how much I'm learning as I transcribe the podcast. And I'm looking at things to add to our tutor training that I think I'm encouraging people to listen to them because it doesn't matter how long you've been in the field. I think it's true. We do work in our own little silos in our programs and so forth. So it's been really great to hear what other programs are doing, different strategies they've used, the successes they've had. And I think there's something in them that everybody can learn from. And I'm enjoying the project and getting to know people through their through their podcasts. So thanks, Ambreen.
Well, thank you. So, when I talk about the overview of the project, I was thinking, how do I start? But then I thought, okay, I was new to the literacy field and I was just 1 year old when I joined MTML. And it's just talking to all the experienced people made such a difference in my learning. And that's when we came up with the idea, why not capture those moments, talking to experienced and knowledgeable practitioners and how we can train the newer practitioners, even the current ones. And I think COVID worsened the situation in a way that, the experienced people were retiring. New people are joining the field, and it's not important that they do have the literacy background, but it's just been so that was our vision that okay, we need to pass on the knowledge to the next generation of practitioners, and I felt the same way myself. So, and Susan will be talking more about the approach we took because it was totally different from how we started. And our approach changed through discussions and conversations with Violet and the team and Susan. So it was totally amazing. So yeah, all these podcasts, our purpose was to pass on these promising practices based on all these insights from experienced, retired, or retiring practitioners. So initially, it was just retiring or retired practitioners, but then we realized that there were people in the field who had 15 plus experience and had amazing insight. So we included those as well. Susan, would you like to talk about the approaches?
Sure. So initially, we said 20 podcasts. And of course, knowing not much about podcasting, we thought, well, we'll just interview 20 different people. And then it became clear that it would be more interesting and we would capture more experience if we not kind of, if we interviewed two or more. I think one of them we've interviewed like three or four people, but most of them it was two people at minimum. A couple, it was only one, and that's because it was just chucked full of information. And so the other thing that we decided, because we listened to a lot of podcasts, and we wanted it to be, we really wanted it to be something that people could go for a walk and listen to it, on your walk, and that the approach would be a conversational approach, not question answer, because we wanted the participants to feel free to kind of go on side trips in their conversation. We also wanted the participants to drive the framework of the podcast. They're the experts, so we let them do that. Not let them. We collaborated with them. So we met with every single person before we did the podcast and had a conversation of what do you think's important in this particular topic. And then we collaborated on a framework. Ambreen and I would build a framework. We'd send it back to the participants and they would say yes, or they would add bits and pieces to it. So it was a very collaborative approach. And I think doing it that way, we got a lot of fruitful information. So that was basically the approach we took. And some of the conversations sort of evolved. Even when we were in the podcast, someone would bring up something and we'd follow that thread. So that's how we went. Some of them, one in particular, it's a series of three, and we'll talk about it later. It's a much more structured approach, and it was actually about teaching methodology. And we'll talk about the other ones, but that's a three-part one that we thought was very worthwhile, and it's on reading, structured reading.
And I
Anything?
think the topics that we selected, although they revolved around the five processes involved, the whole process of the literacy program, but we selected topics that were niche topics. So it wasn't, okay, what do you do at intake? We talked about first conversations or the stuff that comes with experience. So that was another thing we kept in mind when we were building our podcast. We were within the parameters of the five steps in literacy programming, but the topics were revolved around it. So I think that is going to make it more interesting to listen to. Now, there were challenges. I mean, if we start talking about the challenges, I mean, me and Susan were totally amateurs with podcasting. Susan's had still, I think, recorded one or two in the previous year, but technology was a big challenge for us. And I think without Violet, we couldn't have managed our technology, just the guidance of how to manage things on Zoom, because everybody was in their own um, place.
Yeah.
So the sound quality, I mean, it's not CBC. You will not be hearing CBC quality on our podcast, but I think Violet did a great job in balancing everything and guiding us step by step. So technology was one thing. And the reason I think we're talking about this is so that any one of your programs want to create some podcasts, these tips might help you. And if you want to connect to a great editor, it's Violet's there. So
Violet's
that
the one.
technology, yeah, technology was one of them. And then it was the comfort level of individuals. So we did find, we talked to a lot of people. Quite a few of them were not comfortable doing a podcast because even when, I mean, we had to do it, but when you listen to your voice, even I was saying, oh my God, I sound so weird, right? So there were others who said, okay, no, we don't want to do that. So that was a challenge. Plus, it was timing. So people's time. Um, I mean, we did provide a token of appreciation, but I think versus their time and energy, it was much less. But we appreciate everyone who took out the time to talk to us and have these conversations for everyone.
Does Violet want to add anything about the techie part, Violet?
Yes, certainly. So to fill you in a little bit about me, I am an arts instructor at Workman Arts CAMH. I teach audio storytelling and podcasting, and I'm coming up on my 5th semester. So what I teach is grassroots podcasting. So just like to Ambrine's point, it doesn't sound like CBC. We make the most out of what we've got. Okay, it's we rub 2 sticks together and we build a bonfire. And Zoom is an amazing tool, and I'm telling you, you can get a lot of mileage out of the Zoom as a multi-track recording studio. Its transcription capabilities, we it spits out a file that you don't even know how to open it up in. We had to try it in different text editors and everything, but its transcription feature allowed us to have a script of all these interviews, and Susan edited that, and it gave me something with time code to edit. There were some challenges and stuff like that, getting the most sound quality the best sound quality we could get out of the microphones we had. But we learned along the way, and I think we've got something that's pleasant to the ears and listenable, and the stories. To me, the number one rule I'll just say of grassroots podcasting is that the content is the star, and the content in this podcast series I think is A+.
Great, thanks.
See, having a person like Violet just boosted our motivation. So, yeah, I mean, I remember we used headphones, earbuds, mics, phones to re-record. So it was a lot of work that went into it. But I think initially, with all those challenges, we did somehow then manage to everything else, but then went smoothly. Susan.
So this whole thing evolved and was based on practical experience. So we talked to people that either had a lot of knowledge, well, they all had a lot of knowledge on the topic, but also they were really good at sharing their practical experiences. For example, we interviewed 2 instructors from the Toronto District School Board who are instructors in the classroom, and they shared in a really interesting conversation how they created created an engaging classroom environment. And so it was their tips they put in the field for 30 years, I would say, both of them. And so those were the interesting conversations that we had. So it was very practical. It's the only real theoretical one was Jenny Horseman did some based on a lot of research theory that she's done. And also Patricia Derby, who's here, hers is on structured reading. But even Patricia, she gave a lot of theory, but she gave a ton of strategies, tips, activities you could do with them. So they're pretty packed with strategies for the classroom, and we always tried to keep in mind what would a new instructor want to know, what tip would help them in the classroom or strategy. And so it was really important for us to do these podcasts because there are a lot of people leaving and there are new people coming in, and some of them may not be coming from the adult literacy field. They're teachers or instructors, maybe ESL or Link. So they're great instructors, but they might not have the background in English literacy. So that's what we kept in mind too. So and podcasts are really popular right now. I can't believe how popular they are. So we thought this would be a really interesting way to communicate our ideas and to get experienced people to share their ideas was through a podcast because you can listen to them at any time. In fact, I just listened to one in the car when I just came back from Aurelia and I listened to one of them in the car. So it's a great way to get that information.
So, through this project, what we had, the outcome was we've come up with 20 podcasts. Two are on the way, so two are just left to be published. But we've got 20 podcasts, and they've been published on MTML's website. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Player FM. It's been amazing that I think we started publishing towards the end of January, and till now they've been 328 downloads. So besides us listening to it again and again, there are people, and it's amazing. We found that it's not only in Canada, but it's USA. There's some listeners in UK, Australia, Mexico, Russia, Poland. So I think once we start marketing it properly, we'll be reaching the other countries as well. And yes, we did feature experienced practitioners, not only retiring or retired, as had mentioned earlier. We did follow the 5 key literacy services: information and referral, assessment, training plan development, training and follow-up. But you'll see, I do have, I'll be showing you the flyer in the next one, the different topics that we talked about. We included voices from different sectors so that nobody would be left behind. So we had the school board, we had college programs and community-based programs. So they were representatives from all these 3 sectors. We have the Indigenous voice as well. And then
And-
towards the end, sorry.
And Kim's of the deaf.
Yes, Kim's deaf, blind. And there's going to be a printed resource which is on its way. So keep an eye for that one. Anything you want to add, Susan, or should I move to the next one?
No, you can.
Okay.
I just want to say that the Australian one was my daughter.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to say that, but okay.
Well, okay, so this is the list. I hope if you can't see it, just give us a reaction and we can make it a wee bit bigger. But as I said, so I'm just going to highlight some of them. For example, what was interesting to us is the impact of violence on learning. And the second one, the nervous system in learning, was actually talked about. These are Jenny Horseman's podcasts, and they're just packed full of information, and it relates to the classroom with some, excellent insights into what you might see in an adult literacy classroom. But, we were sort of really happy we did it. Jenny was the first podcast we did because at least 3 other people in 3 different podcasts referred to the impact of violence on learning and what they had actually learned from Jenny Horseman. These are experienced people that may have taken her workshop years ago, myself being included, but there were a number of people that referred to it. So I'm really glad we did that because it is such an important topic. Facilitating initial conversation. That would be excellent for assessors or small community base where your staff does everything in, tutoring, intake, assessment. And that one, we made it so that we talked with uh, Kim from the deaf blind community literacy program, a person.
Johanna.
Johanna from a
And
community
Brianna.
based that was embedded in a health center, and then Brianna Big Canoe, who runs an Indigenous program. So they talked about that really first initial conversation that is so important. And there were a lot of similarities, but what was interesting that there was nuanced differences because of the context that they work in. So that made it, even if you don't teach in an Indigenous program, it's such an interesting thing to listen to. Oh, that's the difference, you know. She knows every single one. She teaches on the island, Georgina Island, and she said she knows everybody on the island. So before someone might come into her program, she already knows them. So her approach is a little bit different. There was another one, building community in the classroom, and that was the two instructors that talked about how they engage their learners and how they actually, what was their routine in the classroom, especially in a continuous intake situation. So that could help people. And the one that I kind of liked, and don't ask me why, but I loved it. It was the one on math anxiety. So it's not how to teach math, but what was really interesting about that is that, again, it was two experienced math teachers. They talked about math anxiety, and like pretty much every second person would raise their hand and say they have math anxiety. But they talked about how they worked with that, and they talked about how they scored or marked learners' work so that it was non-judgmental and it was a more positive experience. They gave fabulous tips on that. And some of them I hadn't heard of before, but I thought, oh yeah, if I was a math teacher, I'd try that. So that one was very interesting too. Um, One that a number of people have talked to us about that really kind of was inspirational. They all were, but this one, and it was an instructor that teaches at the East Detention Center in Toronto, and the manager, Joy. It's a program run by Centennial College. And the instructor was just so inspirational. I mean, it was a very heartfelt podcast in how she talked about the men that she served. And
And I just want to add that that was the only podcast we did in person.
yeah,
So we all were in the same room. So just looking at each other, the emotions, it was amazing.
yeah. And so we all want to teach in the correctional institution now. I mean, and there's a lot of people in literacy that have actually taught in that situation. And they might have started as a volunteer there. So that was a really sort of heart, kind of tugged at your heartstrings, that one. Um, so there's a lot of them. There was one on conflict resolution, which also, it was a very experienced instructor from what used to be called Frontier College, United for Literacy. And she is well trained in conflict resolution. And another long-term, well, not in the field anymore, who taught in the West End. And they talked about conflict resolution, not only with reading the students, like reading the room as one of them talked about, but reflecting on how your personal viewpoint is on conflict, and that needs to be considered. So lots of really sort of interesting reflections in each of these podcasts. Um,
Even I think the Indigenous perspective was amazing because we did it with Paul, who's an instructor in Toronto Council Fire. His perspective about humans was totally different. I mean, it's not only you would stop and wonder, oh, do we treat Indigenous people differently, or but his approach was very humane. So
yeah.
very interesting perspective.
Yeah, and another one, it's really, well, when we were thinking about it, we were thinking like, how would you do a podcast on how to teach a particular math concept? I don't think that would work. And we wanted to do something on writing. And what it turned out to be is it was Mary and Joe from Parkdale Project Read, which is a West End community program. And they talked about how to really sort of the core of the conversation, I think, was how to facilitate small groups, how to do that and what it looked like. And it was very instructive in we learned a lot from listening to them, how the group is sort of run, what kind of space it is, how the learners are so involved in setting up sort of the ground rules for that. And in sort of weaved through that was the writing experience and how Mary and Joe sort of facilitate that. And it's a long time program, so there was lots of really good information in that one. And that could be work in a community base or if you were in a classroom. I mean, a writing group in a school board or even a college setting, you would get a lot of really good tips from that. Um, so anything?
No, I mean, for structured reading, I know Patricia's here. Oh my God, there was so much information. And I've been teaching my whole life, but it was a totally different point of view. We could be doing the same thing differently, but when you actually listen to what's the structure, how do you work on things, what are the different examples, it was totally amazing. So for structured reading, part one, two, and three, I would say you should have lots of coffee before you listen to it.
Or do it in pieces. And the interesting thing about that, of course, and anybody in literacy knows this, is that reading theory has kind of flip-flopped back and forth over the last few decades on, whole language, phonics, blended literacy, balanced literacy. And what Patricia has presented is the most current um, theory on it. But what makes it so valuable and what made it so long is that there's just tons and tons of strategies and examples. And Patricia has also shared with us some resource
Resource.
references that will be included in our package. So we were really fortunate to have that. Plus, um, there's lots of the last one we just finished is learning and literacy in the internet era. And that was a conversation between Audrey Gardner from Labor
Like,
Education Center and Christine Benson Johnson from Alpha Plus. And that was a very interesting conversation because I mean, that's sort of uppermost in everybody's agenda these days is how are we thinking about that whole technology piece? So it's kind of I would say, a good conversational podcast. It's not giving any um, sort of here's the solution, but it's giving you lots of things to think about and to talk about.
and I think the other one, which I would, it's very interesting, is the learner's perspective. We did realize that uh, that piece was missing when we had started doing the podcast. So me and Susan, we're sort of talking to different learners from different settings, so college sector, school board, and community based. And then we're going to combine it, as Violet told us, do it as like a story. So the narration would be there, but I think that's the two parts where we're hoping that once instructors listen to the learner's perspective, it will sort of validate what we've been talking about in the rest of the podcast. So keep an eye for those ones because that's the last one we're going to be doing in March.
Any questions at this point? Feel free. There's or comments. We do have a number of people who participated in the podcast that are here. And you know, maybe some of them want to comment now or later. It's totally up to them, but it's nice to have some of the participants actually in this workshop. So we'll move to the highlights. And so throughout these 20 podcasts, it was really quite evident after about the first 10 that there were these themes that kept emerging. And like number one, in every conversation, the learner, instructor, or tutor
Mm.
relationship came out loud and clear, and how important that was. It was like paramount. People, when we talk to them about their classroom or referral systems or any of this other stuff, they didn't talk about, oh, here's how you do, here's how you teach a paragraph, or here's how you teach a sentence, structure kind of thing, or here's how you teach, geometry. It was this learner instructor relationship was absolutely at the top of the list and ran through every single podcast. The next thing, and this was interesting too, was referral and how important that was right from the initial conversation to during programming. Either it was the tutor that helped with it, or the instructor if they're in a classroom or a college or school board. That referral was really important. It wasn't to really have that learner centered, more holistic approach. The referral is really important, and unfortunately I don't know if we're given credit for that kind of work when it comes down to the funders. The how much, I mean, they know it's important, but I don't know if we get accredited for that. But that came out loud and clear. Every single person talked about referrals and the importance of it. And the third thing, and that came, which was really interesting, no matter what you did and what you talked about, and whether it was conflict resolution or that initial conversation, or just how does your program handle referrals, every single one of them said it's most effective in a team effort. That
Yeah.
And that, I remember talking about the school board where the instructors in the classroom, they would give the kind of referrals like food banks, shelters, dental, free dental clinics, things like that. But even the instructors, even though they were in their individual classrooms, would always collaborate. You could go into a lunchroom and they'd be saying, does anybody know, what food bank is open on Thursday, or where's the nearest dental clinic? It's very much a team effort approach. And
And
some,
there's one
yep,
podcast which we did with Anne Marie Williams from PTP and Anita from she retired, but she was at LAMP. Very interesting point of view from a community-based program.
yes,
So where instructors might be, there's so much different roles that they're doing as well. So it really depends if you want to take help from your supervisor, from your manager, from peers, or other colleagues, just to make sure it's a collaborative approach. So yeah, referrals, that podcast was very interesting, gave because I think sometimes instructors might be pressurized. Oh my God, how am I going to do all these referrals and know about the services? That's not my job. But when it's a team effort, right? You have colleagues who would support you, then that's where things work out well for the learner. So yes,
mhm,
that was one of, I mean, it almost came
another,
up in every podcast. And
yeah,
then I think again, the impact of violence and trauma. I remember I was new to literacy, as I mentioned, and I did read Jenny's book. And I'd heard about Jenny at what, 4 years ago, and I didn't look at my teachings the way Jenny had taught us. So it's just knowing that perspective. We don't realize what baggage or what challenges the learners come with. Yeah, that podcast was amazing too.
yeah. So there were some, like I say, there were some threads that went through all 20 of them. And just to sort of give you a sneak preview, when two of the learners that we have talked to, both of them, number one on their list was a relationship, and how the tutor went out of their way to help them with things that had nothing to do with reading, writing, and numeracy, but had to do with other supports that they needed in life that help them persist in a program. And I guess that was the point of the referrals, is that it does help people persist. Not that you can fulfill all of them, as Anne Marie said, in the Toronto area, for example, you can give them a housing referral, but you know, it's still tough in Toronto to get decent housing. So anyway, those were some of the themes that came out. Yeah. Any questions or comments? Just, you know. No? Okay, so, oh, Grace, please,
Grace.
go ahead.
Let me just give me a second and I'll turn on my camera. If I can remember where the camera is.
There
Okay.
you are.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I've had the opportunity to listen to a couple of them, because there's 20 and, you know, they range between 30 minutes to an hour. It's quite the time investment, but you know, that's okay. No, just sort of comments. I think they're fantastic. And I don't know about anyone else, but I know that we have been struggling with instructor training, because we just don't have the time and opportunity. Back in the day, you know, you could hire people that were already experienced in literacy, and there was more support about, you know, your specific, the policies of your program. TDSB, of course, having, you know, many policies. But now we're, just as you had mentioned, we're actually onboarding individuals that may be experienced in adult teaching, but not necessarily literacy, and finding the time to be able to impart a lot of this knowledge is difficult. So this is fantastic, and it's great because there could be certain topic areas that you could zero in and say to an individual, you know, listen to this podcast, it's really applicable to what you're having an issue with, or since you're new, you know, listen to this. So I look forward to listening to the rest of them. Hopefully I can, you know, get through them all. But yeah, no, it's great. Just sort of a comment to say that these are great, and I think we'll have a lot of purpose in the field for imparting knowledge, training, whatever. And you're right, and whether you're new to LBS or you're experienced, because I think there's a lot of nuggets of information that are applicable to anybody for regardless of how many years you've been teaching. There's always something new that you can learn. So thank you very much for actually doing these. They're fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, yeah, that brings up a good point, because I can see if we move into, you know, how you're going to use these. For example, if you had, and I know because I do a bit of work for TDSB as a supply, and they have staff meetings. And so I can see, you know, using a small, you know, section like the math anxiety one. Just pick out the section where Rick and Brian, who's a TDSB instructor, give tips on how they mark. Like Brian says, I never use a red pen unless was one situation he did use a red pen. And Rick said, you know, here's how I do my assessments. I set it up, and I love his quote. He always says, I rig it for success. And he explains how he does that. And I thought, yeah, a new instructor, that could be really helpful. It's quick. You could, you know, play that little portion of the podcast, you know, 15 minutes in a staff meeting, and it could generate a lot of conversations. Well, what do you do with math? And let's talk about math anxiety in general, because it's huge. And you don't have to be a literacy student to have math anxiety.
Yeah, and I don't know if in your the one podcast, as I said, I haven't listened to them all, but you have one that's about, you know, literacy in the internet age. I don't know if in many of your podcasts you actually touched upon the difference between, because of course during COVID, we went to online remote programming. A number of programs are still doing a majority of their programming online or trying to transition. Just that concept of the difference between the two, and you know, because that's sort of a new thing now that even, you know, the experienced instructors from pre-COVID may not have experience with, but
Yeah.
experiencing the comparison between them.
Yeah, well,
So
you know what's interesting, Grace, is we didn't maybe get in as far deep into that, but what did get discussed is the difference between reading online and reading in print. And now they're amassing more
mm,
research around that. And so that in itself, because I mean, everybody was kind of thrown into that. And, you know, there are some limitations that the research sort of bears out, like comprehension is better with print if it's sort of informational kind of thing. If it's for fun and you're just reading, you know, a novel or something, online there's no difference, doesn't appear to be any difference so far anyway. So we did talk about that and that information alone, because even if you don't deliver remote, a lot of instructors are still using the internet and they're still doing exercises and reading online. And it would be very helpful for them to know, well, what are the differences and how can I mitigate some of those things? So, yeah, so there's lots of little pieces, because you're right. We said originally they're going to be 30 minutes, you know. Well, that proved to be much more difficult because, you know, everybody had so much good stuff to share. So I can well imagine just taking, you know, 10-15 minute chunk out of it. Patricia's, of course, somebody you'd have to break that up into, you know, that's Go for a Long Walk podcast, right, Patricia?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that could be really good. Um, so
And again, I think it's a good way for mentorship as well. If you've got some experienced tutors you onboard new instructors or hire new instructors, just to make their, you know, that initial experience is very important, just to make it more collaborative and teamwork. um, it would be a good idea to pair them up and say, okay, listen to these podcasts, and what do you think? The discussions could go on from there. It could be more, you know, reflection. It could be sharing of experiences of, I mean, we were talking to two newer instructors as well. We had a conversation with them as well. And although they did get support from the supervisors, but I think this was lacking that, okay, I faced this in my class. What would you do, right? So that pairing of that experienced person with the new instructor would also be a great opportunity to listen to these podcasts.
yeah. So
And
yeah,
then, yeah,
sorry.
no, no, go ahead.
Um, and I think some of them could, you know, serve as a part of a reflective process on your uh, your actual practice yourself. It gives you the opportunity to think about, well, what am I doing and what are some experiences? Like I can see, you know, a new assessor could listen to the one on the initial conversation, because it's not talking about here's the question, you specific question you ask. It's talking about the nuances of that conversation, the tone. And I think Kim, I always quote Kim um, in that conversation when she said, it's like your first date. You want to make a good impression. And so just the fact that it's a very conversational style, you know, they talk about the different tips. So there's lots there for the different roles, and in community base where some staff do everything. They're the assessor, the tutor, the administrator. You know, any one of these would be helpful, I think.
Yeah. And I think when we included one podcast on it's called PMP Action Center, although Susan was a part of it, of that project, I wasn't, right? I wasn't even in Canada. So just listening to the how the referrals and the collaboration worked was amazing. So it, you know, just case study analysis. I mean, now I feel with hopefully Doug Ford is going to give us more money for skill development. Maybe this a model could be duplicated. But yeah, I mean, that's just giving ideas on how those can be used. The other one I thought was really interesting was also the intake and assessment at the college level.
Yes.
Um, um, Again, the reason I'm going to repeat that I'm newer to it, I didn't know how things worked in the college sector, academic upgrading. But when we did the podcast, I know Therese and Elizabeth Charter were so good in giving me the direction, the steps. It was just amazing. So those instructors who are in the community based or, you know, school board and their learners have to transition to the college, that podcast is such a good guide to how things are managed in the college sector. So
In
yeah,
fact, it's a podcast that learners could listen to that are ready to transition. It sort of takes a lot of the fear and the mystery out of what it looks like at the college level. There's just so much help. In fact, one of the things that I learned is that there's scholarships and bursaries at the college level for LB academic upgrading. I didn't even know that. So there's something in there for everybody. That would be a good one. Anybody have any questions about how they might want to use it, or any comments? Please feel free to share them with us.
It's Kim speaking. Would you recommend when you get the learner one finished that that would be one that another learner coming into the program? I know you haven't finished it yet, so you don't know the content, but I was just thinking of that. Something for the learner to listen to.
Maybe we haven't quite. What we're sort of going to frame it around is a learner's journey. So it's going to be, and we're still sort of got our creative juices running on this one, is that, what it's all the sort of stages of going through a literacy program, where we'll sort of narrate it and then highlight it with inserts from the learners. So maybe it could actually.
yeah. I mean, I think it would provide a picture of what a learner goes through, and what are their expectations, or what worked well for them, or what were the challenges. So we're trying to target that one as well. So yeah, it's going to be stage wise. And again, we haven't made the framework.
It's actually turned out to be the most challenging,
Yeah.
because of course, some learners are really good at sort of talking about their program, but a lot of them, it's all wonderful. Everything is wonderful. And to kind of tease out information is, you got to take more time, and we actually have to talk to them longer, to make them feel comfortable. I just had somebody who said she would do the podcast and then she wouldn't do the podcast. Now she called me this morning and said, "Yeah, I'll do it." So it's pretty intimidating to go on record. So that one's going to take a bit more time to do, but we'll certainly think about that, Kim, because that's a good idea too.
Yeah.
If we can make it work, that would be good.
Mhm.
Any other questions or comments, or Teresa? Okay, Teresa just put something in there, correction about what we might have said about academic upgrading.
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the resource booklet that you're creating to go with them. What sort of material are you planning to have on that, and how are you imagining it will be used?
Okay.
And I can also say that I thought podcasts might be hard to find, and discovered that any app that has podcasts, you seem to be able to find them. So maybe those who are more experienced will say if that's not quite the case, but I hadn't quite realized that you can find them in any app. So maybe there's others like me that are less familiar with podcasts and didn't know that you can find them many places.
Oh, good, thanks.
Yes,
Yeah.
Jenny, it's again, Violet guided us, but we actually published it on Podbean, but we shared it on different platforms. So some people don't do that. So it's very specific to their website, but we try to make it more accessible, because everybody wouldn't just go to our website. So we tried, that's a marketing thing. So yes.
So maybe Gail can talk
Yeah.
about the resource.
The printed resource, I think in the original grant, we said we would do a printed resource that had all the transcriptions from each individual podcast. So if somebody wanted to read along or read them. So that's the point I'm at right now, is the transcription part. I mean, Violet provided a good recording, but of course, it basically transcribing, most of them run around 57 pages on the transcription. But when you take out all the timestamps and put things all together, it's usually about 8 to 9 pages a podcast. So And I do think what we'll do is do an executive summary for each. So I haven't put it all together yet, but I think it'll be the summary followed by the podcast and kind of in succession 1 to 20. I do think we had said that we would do a resource at the end on follow-up, because that was something that we had put in the original grant, but we didn't do an actual podcast on.
No, we did
Because
actually.
it-
We did. We
you
ended up
some
doing one
follow-up?
follow-up. Yeah.
Okay, so
But
there
we
may be
were
some added little pieces, and then certainly we'll put some links, because I know, like you, Jenny, provided some links to things, and I think Patricia did as well, and so forth. So I will get all of those from MTML and put them with the podcast transcription at the end. So that's kind of where we're at, and I'm in a bit of a panic mode now. So, because I think I'm on podcast 8. I didn't realize the transcription would take as long. So, that's where we're working right now.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
So it's Kim again. I was just thinking of that resource when you said links. Like I was thinking if I was somebody who went to a specific link, or sorry, a specific podcast, if I could go to that resource and then, yeah, fine, like where did that instructor go to get that stuff? Or who are some of their partners that they work with? So if somebody, for example, went to the first one with us and wanted to know about, Indigenous or about deafblind, that there would be links attached to that. So if they went specifically there because this is a community that they're working with, that there might be either a link to the organization that provided the service who does additional services, or I don't know. Anyway, it just made me think
Yeah,
of
yeah,
more
I mean,
work. Sorry.
we're, yeah, no, those are all great ideas. To tell you the truth, the time involved in doing this
Yeah.
was not something we were realistic about.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we were to do this over again, we'd do 10 podcasts because they were just so time consuming, and then we'd have more time, but we'll put as many resources in. Like, some people have sent us resources. I found a really cool resource, PDF file on structured reading. You come across these things. So yeah.
But I like the idea, Kim. Maybe towards the end, Gail. I mean, we can discuss it. Put links to the programs, right?
That would be good. And just as Susan said, things take a lot longer. I think initially we figured an hour to 2 per podcast transcription, where it's taking about 5 hours.
Yeah.
per. So instead of the initial, 30 hours or whatever to do the print not even that much, around that to do the print thing, it'll be more like 100 hours.
Yeah, I know. We were way up.
Patricia?
So we were way off in that area.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's an ambulance going by. There we go. Could you not, do you have it set up so that Zoom provides you with summaries, not the Read AI thing, but the summary, the meeting summary?
Yeah.
Because that might be a lot easier to just go, like the summaries are a lot shorter, right? Like it's a quick recap and there'll be some other information. Like I use all of that with my volunteer training as just another thing to send them besides the resources. It might
Yeah,
save
it
them
does.
time.
It does. But I think, Gail is probably,
Well, it's too late now, I guess, but
well, it's what you put in your proposal too.
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
see,
we
that
have
was
to
what
be responsible.
Yes.
we did say we'd put the full transcription in,
Gotcha.
so we
Yeah,
have
that
to
makes
do
sense.
that.
Yeah, we
Okay.
will.
And it was just, because it was the first time for any of us doing something
Right.
like this.
And the
we
transcript's
really
important for people that
underestimated the time.
can't hear it. That if it's not being
Yes,
sung for them or something, then yes, the transcript makes a lot of sense instead
Yeah.
of just the summary.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
It might be an opportunity, though, to ask Violet, is there a way for me to just take out all the timestamps?
I would use ChatGPT.
Okay. All right.
Drop it into ChatGPT and tell it to suck out all the timestamps. Yeah, and it'll spit out.
It
It
will.
might. I don't know. That's where I would go to first. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I can give that a try, because that's like half the battle, because sometimes a timestamp just has 3 words under it and then
Right.
you're down to another full. So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you for that.
no, thank you. But I mean, just towards the end, I just wanted to say that, yes, we thought when we had put in the proposal, I know me and Gail were working on it, but when we put it in, we had a different mindset. But actually going through the whole process was a very new learning curve for each one of us, because the time it takes, the effort it takes, although I think we saw spark in people's eyes. That was the best thing. I mean,
Yes.
just talking about their past experiences, their programs at work. And we try to capture that in our conversations in the podcast. So I really do hope that everybody enjoys listening to it. Pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. I think it would make a difference.
So we do have a number of people who here who did participate. If anybody wants to make any comments about, their experience with it, feel free to,
I loved it. You know, I could have talked for hours. When Ambreen first approached me in November, she wanted me to take my hour and a half workshop and put it into a 30-minute podcast. I remember thinking, oh, you don't know me well enough yet to know that I can't whittle down an hour and a half into 30 minutes. So I'm impressed that we whittled it down to the 3. But it was great. I really enjoyed it. And I've done a lot of media in my previous life. And so the podcast reminded me of that. But I think that I felt that very strongly that Ambreen and Susan did a really great job of making it a conversation versus a webinar, right? It was a conversation, because then Susan would say something about her teaching practice and Ambreen would, and it was a nice back and forth. And I feel like that added to the interest in it as well. It wasn't just me reciting about stuff. And it was,
Right,
and we
right.
got really warmed up after the first few minutes in the first one. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to listen. There's so many good topics in there, and I'm going to share it in our organization as well. I think, it's pretty neat. So I'm going to share it with the community coordinators across the country.
Oh,
Thank you.
great. That's great. Okay. Anybody else? Georgina?
Georgina.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, my voice is a little squawky today, but I'll
Wow.
do my best. I had to turn off my camera because I was coughing so much. I just want to say congrats. What a great team effort. And I was part of one of the podcasts, and amazing to bring back the memories, but only as well as the experiences that were given throughout, not only as an instructor, administrator, but for the students and learners involved. I've listened to a few of them, super interesting. I would say pass them along. They are great for any new instructor, volunteer or otherwise. There's a lot to be taken from these podcasts. So kudos. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Hi there.